Thanks a lot for joining. So now it's time for lesson number 2 of chapter 1. And I'm going to talk about web stack errors response against the information gathering of infrastructure. So I will explain you better what what's the reason why it's so important. So first of all, when somebody is attacking a place that doesn't know, is trying to discover quickly what is the layout of infrastructure. Consider that right now with cloud, everything is becoming more standardized. And so the information gathering, for example, through HTTP header in cloud is quite straightforward. You identify an S3, whatever you are querying quite easily through the HTTP header. So let's think on, for example, the TCP trace route that classically we always used to bypass the firewall and see how many ops network-wise we were having between the web stack and ourselves. So you understood how passionate I am about infrastructure because it's a complex piece, and each piece of a puzzle is capable to invalidate the efforts security-wise. So now think about the general design. In lesson 1, we explain the principle around it, some tips and tricks for you as infrastructure consultant on how understand the boundaries, the connectivity, the potential lateral move, and whatever else. But in this lesson, I want to zoom in on how even a good design can have an issue in the implementation that is going to change the effectiveness of your security controls. So let's move right into that. So there is if you talk about information disclosure, it's going to be a big deal because in pen testing is just informational most of the time. Everybody think about it as just a versioning of a service, and I think a lot changed historically since we got bug bounty. So the first rule of a bug bounty is you'll get a duplicate, but the second one, we don't care about information gathering if you don't exploit it. Unfortunately, this one is a message that is creating sloppy attitude towards that. Because for me, infrastructure wise, and for whatever consultant that is evaluating apps, is not just versioning. It's also explain the design of infrastructure and where, in which layer the attacker can potentially land. So load balancing is a bit like when you design the gate of a villa, you want an entry point that reduces the attack surface where you can focus your efforts to control and everything pass through that. That is a normal principle in design terms, but it's going to be tricky at the time that we talk about a load balancer. In fact, the load balancer is supposed to be your gate. It's supposed to do SSL inspection, but it does a lot of sophisticated things, including application routing. When you attack a load balancer, you can potentially get private key because are published on the load balancer. You can redirect stuff. You can rewrite HTTP request and response maliciously as well. And that's not only that. That device potentially is having a management access interface. So if you exploit it at the kernel level, you can also play with static root. So it's underestimated because right now we are talking only about is just a service. But think about an NJX. Is implemented in so many products. Here you have an example on your right hand. When you download the slides on SlideShare, you'll zoom in and see it better. But on the right hand side, at the center of the page, there is, for example, an NJX vulnerability that impacted an IBM product. Those kind of dependency on certain project is enlarging the problem. Plus, you find some specific kind of CVE, like the one that I mentioned here, the 5902 for F5, that was about traffic management on the management interface. But was discovered that some were exposed as well. So it's always key to evaluate your load balancing layer with a lot of attention on what can potentially cause as a damage. So here you find an article that I just took as example of an exploitation. So another problem is if you see a gate and you are capable to bypass the gate, it's the typical image where you see the parking bar and everybody just doing the round. It's actually happening in load balancing too. And I will show you going forward way more. Problem, the HTTP response is telling to the attacker where it is. But if it's also the place where the SSL handshake is established as endpoint, like you see in this picture, you'll find a availability problem. For example, here you have an Amazon security disclosure about a problem that is OpenSSL related and not Amazon, that was having an availability problem. I took a recent one, just 2020, just to be sure that I'm not talking about PODL 2014 kind of stuff. We know how is design problem SSL in general. We open the Pandora box and every time we find something that we try to work around. But we need to understand how all this conversation of the flow, like I said in the previous lesson, is also about the fact that if you establish layers to filter you, and so from the client, you face the CDN, you're going through an infrastructure on-prem, for example, and is landing on load balancer on NGIX. And when there is an error, is directly straight the backend to answer, you invalidate a lot of efforts in there because actually you risk that is going direct back to the client, and you risk also a reverse shell kind of problem. You risk that the error is not translated through the layers, and so the path is asymmetric. And you risk also bypassing any direction. For example, if a CDN doesn't have a pool of IP whitelisted on the firewall, you can find the client that find the load balancer IP and go straight. Sometimes can happen that UI testing, some A/B testing, some stuff created some sort of rules. Don't forget that CDN is heavily used for application routing too. And application routing is key because if I need to attack the availability of a company and I get a load balancer API and I can poke it, I could potentially redirect almost all traffic. So it's not a small kind of issue. So here I take an example of AWS on this topic on the bypass, the parking bar that gets bypassed. If you see, even in the documentation, there is a lot of stress about the fact that you should configure everything to be well designed and not be bypassed. For example, configure the security group for your application load balancer and classic load balancer to accept traffic only from a specific client. This security group must allow inbound traffic from clients on the listening port and outbound traffic. So the idea is know who can contact you. Don't let the to bypass the layer. Configure the security group for your Amazon EC2 instance to accept traffic only from the load balancer. And so it's not that you establish a gateway and you're done. As you notice, some of these rules are configuration related. And you see how a good design can have a bad implementation. And let's talk about hardening or implementation. So you need to stay sharp as infrastructure security consultant. Sit down and think about the principle. Where is the silent shake taking place? Who reply to what? This is the main rule for infrastructure. So you want always to know who manage the error, and don't forget that you should stop an attacker more far away than you can. The attacker shouldn't be capable to be stopped so close to the crown jewel. Like if you stop it in the front end, you are already on the premises if it's on-prem. You shouldn't. You should make it at the CDN. So be 100% sure to establish control in each layer. So don't remediate only on the external, hoping that everything is okay, because it's becoming like the front end, back end input validation race condition, where, for example, you have a web page, your JavaScript check the form input, and your backend trust the front end, and it doesn't recheck again. So the first one with burp, change, bypass your control on the front end, and the back end is just swallowing whatever is passing. Don't do the same mistake, because it's exactly the same repeated at the infrastructure with an exposure that is wider. So the HTTP response should be always filtered from the layer in front. This one protect you in multiple ways. Translate error code at the CDN is not just a matter of security by obfuscating something. It's not that. You also avoid a risk of reverse connectivity. You need to break the SSL, be 100% sure nothing goes direct, especially from backend. All these situations that I describe are the day-to-day life of many pen testers. So when I'm pen testing something, I do the discovery of a layer, like the TCP trace routing kind. It's the same here. If an NGIX reply to me, I know already where I will land. And that is going to be a problem, because I know that I can potentially bypass everything and poke just an inner layer. And you saw how many vulnerability sometimes can happen across that. So think about SSL vulnerabilities. We know that it's standard. It's going to happen. So you need to know also what is your remediation. I get a bit surprised sometimes reading incident response playbook. It's not only about the environment itself, it should be about the layer. You need that infrastructure wide open thinking about it. So if you are having an attacker, you don't want to push by SR the remediation just on-prem. You need to push it there, but also to the CDN in front. Why CDN security is so important sometimes? It's not a panacea, but is actually helping to keep the state hidden and keep the attacker far away. So which layer mitigates the exposure is not just from an availability and reliability engineering point of view. You need to understand the action of the automation and the visibility that you are having also on the attack. Because anyway, you want to tap those gateway to your incident response to have visibility, but you know how SSL is going to be a big caveat. The next lesson will be only dedicated to SSL endpoints. So to be 100% sure that we touch upon a key point. So what can what the attacker can reach is up to you. But think on the overall conversation on how an architect can have done a good design, how the cloud service provider is going to give you clear indication of what you should do, like here, and how much a change, overlooking something can actually trash everything away. So don't forget, you shouldn't have this thinking only when you get the pen testing report. And another issue is sometimes everybody rely on their pen testing capabilities. But pen testing sometimes are specific to an environment. The scope of a pen test is not generally wide to the entire company. And most of these layers, integration problems that I just described are not spotted simply because the scope is narrower. So you need to also to think that your pen testing should be the double check, but you should have controls across the entire design way before on that. And if you are one of those that say, I'm not an auditor, that is the wrong attitude. And most of the data breach are up to that attitude too. It's not due to you to do configuration check, but it's up to you to ask the right question to have your right opinion. So if you act like an infrastructure a security consultant, a security architect that does a review of environment, you get flooded by data. You can't go on buffer overflow because you can't follow only what you read. You need to have your thinking. Now, if you recap lesson one that I just did it, I gave you some tips and tricks on how to map the blocks. Don't forget the structure of your ML flow because you know that on the left hand side you have most external. You want to leave the attacker far away, and so if for each element you think in your ML flow way how I show you, you'll achieve that because you'll have a thinking that say, okay, this one it's not going to mitigate that. So these few rules sounds really silly, but are based on experience, and load balancer is everywhere. You saw doesn't matter, cloud, on-prem doesn't matter. And it's not actually changing the point because application routing is done also based on policies that are parsing of HTTP request. So if you request a certain URL, you get redirect there. If every time you give HTTP response that are quite straightforward, you are going to give that understanding of how your policy works too. So it is more complex than you think. And what is said is talk about information discovery, and everybody will say, it's just a version. We don't care. We strip of a version, doesn't matter. It's not about the version. It's not that I need to understand that it is a version, a vulnerable version. It's just understanding where I'm actually landing with my request. Next lesson will be released as soon as I can. I'm doing my best to keep up, stay focused. I'm trying to give you content that you not actually found somewhere else because they're based on experience and are about the big picture. So I hope you'll enjoy. I'm doing what I can to give you quality. Take the slides. At the end, when I will finish the course, I will have a big, just one file. For now, cope with that. Each lesson is having, because it's dynamic draft, I need to do like that. go on SlideShare, download and see it. And it's the course is free, is always there. So if you didn't understand something, just check it out and be ready for the next lesson that will be about SSL endpoints. And it's not just about the SSL conversation, it's about key management and other kind of stuff. So I hope you enjoy, and thanks a lot for looking. Feel free to comment. Your feedback is really important. If you like to share, please do it. You'll see I'm not trying to sell you nothing. So far, not even a t-shirt. And so you'll see my honest efforts to not get any kind of revenue out of it, not even a donate link. So have a good one. Take care. Cheers.